Ever stop and think about how a huge decision, one made right at the top, might not actually be the thing that hits people the hardest day to day? What if the real roadblocks, or as one source puts it, the real villains, are closer than you think? That's kind of what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. We're looking at excerpts from a piece called The Real Villains of Traditionis Custodes. It's from Epistles. Our mission really is to unpack this, to understand its argument about who really ended up being responsible for the squeeze put on traditional Latin Mass communities. This all goes back to Pope Francis's decree, Traditionis Custodes, from July 2021.
Right. And that decree, Traditionis Custodes, basically the Pope acting on his own initiative to really clamp down on the old Latin Mass, it definitely hit hard and fast. Our source really drives home how it devastated many traditional Catholics, to what I'll land. These are people who told the source they found real, authentic nourishment, reverence, and communion with the saints in that Mass. The source doesn't pull punches, calls the document harsh, says it hurt millions who just wanted to worship like saints and popes had done for, 18 centuries. The impact was definitely swift, no question.
Okay, so the source does acknowledge right up front what most people probably assume. Pope Francis is responsible. He issued it. And yeah, it discriminated against Catholics who loved a form of the Mass the Church itself had approved for ages. That seems clear. But then comes this twist, this pivot in the argument. It says, look, it wasn't Pope Francis physically walking into parishes saying, stop the Latin Mass. And it wasn't Cardinal Roche sending out all the circulars that took away permissions and, scattered these communities.
Exactly. And that's where the source points the finger quite directly. The central accusation is, it was the bishops. The idea is, when that motu proprio, the Pope's decree, came out, bishops worldwide sort of read the room, saw it as a signal. And the actions they took next. The source claims they weren't really about pastoral care, not about sensitivity to their people. It argues it was more about fear, compliance, or sometimes outright disdain, which is, it's a strong claim about their motives.
So what did that look like? What were these actions driven by fear or compliance? The source gives some pretty concrete examples. Parishes where the Latin Mass was going along just fine, peacefully, suddenly told, nope, stop.
Just like that.
Yeah. And priests, priests who'd built up these really devout communities around the old rite, they were told they couldn't celebrate it anymore, not unless they got specific permission from Rome, jumping through hoops.
Right, and the communities themselves.
They were either moved, basically shuffled off to what the source calls obscure chapels, like hard to get to places.
Out of sight, out of mind kind of thing.
Pretty much. Or just told to disperse entirely, break up.
Wow.
The source sums it up as causing a fresh and deep wound to the body of Christ.
But here's a really critical piece of the puzzle the source brings up. It says Traditionis Custodes itself, the document, actually included a clear provision. A provision saying bishops could ask for exceptions. They could appeal for permission to keep things going.
So it wasn't necessarily an absolute ironclad shutdown order everywhere?
That's what the source argues. It wasn't meant to be inescapable, apparently. There was, theoretically, a way.
And that makes this next part even more, well, surprising, because the source states many of these requests were, in fact, approved by Cardinal Roche.
They were.
Yes. So the source points out some bishops did their part. They did write to Rome. They explain, souls were at stake, acted like true shepherds, as the source puts it. But, and this is the big but, these bishops, the source says they were few.
Only a few took that route.
Very few, according to this account. Makes you wonder about the rest.
Well, the source draws a pretty clear conclusion about the majority. It says they simply imposed the motu proprio's restrictions without resistance, just rolled over, essentially.
Yeah, without resistance. Why? Did the source offer reasons?
It did. It suggests a mix of things. Many bishops, it says, just had no real appreciation for the traditional Latin Mass. Maybe didn't get it. Some had never celebrated it themselves. Others maybe viewed it as outdated or divisive. And then there's the claim that some simply feared losing favor in Rome. Didn't want to rock the boat.
The politics of it.
Right. So the source's bottom line is harsh. In the name of obedience, it says, they failed to defend what was holy.
And that leads to maybe the strongest claim in the piece. Bishops had the power to protect the traditional Latin Mass. They still do.
Still do. Even now.
That's what it says. It puts it bluntly. Bishops who wanted to preserve the old rite did. Bishops who did not care, let it die.
That really puts the responsibility squarely on them, doesn't it? It suggests it was a conscious choice for many.
It does. It frames it very much as a matter of will, of choosing whether or not to act.
And the source connects this directly to the the real-world pain people felt. It talks about dioceses just quietly announced that permissions had expired. Poof, gone. Communities just discontinued.
Like closing a store branch.
Yeah, and think about online directories, parish websites, suddenly having to update with notes like mass discontinued or location closed.
Mm.
The source calls these signs of abandonment and betrayal by their own bishops. It's powerful language.
It really is. It's like the head office sends a directive, but it's the local managers who decide how harshly to enforce it, right? The source then contrasts this with historical figures, holy bishops like St. John Vianney, St. Padre Pio.
St. Paul II is mentioned too.
Right. And it argues these men would have taken action.
How so?
By writing letters, making appeals, protecting their people, they wouldn't have just stayed silent when their communities were hurting.
And the source really doubles down on this critique of present-day bishops, or at least many of them. It says too many act more like princes than pastors.
Princes, not pastors. What does that imply?
Well, fear. Afraid of losing their position, their status, approval from higher-ups. Being chained, as the source puts it, by the fear of being out of step.
So prioritizing their own standing over the needs of the flock.
That's the strong implication, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Putting hierarchy and maybe career advancement ahead of pastoral duty.
There's a really striking image the source uses to drive this home. It quotes a Filipino song. It says, "Pinosas ang kamay ng bata upang ito'y magingiseng sunod-sunuran."
What does that mean?
It translates to, the child's hands were chained to make him blindly obedient.
Wow.
And the source says this image sadly reflects the state of many bishops today. Chained by obedience, unable or unwilling to act courageously. It's quite a metaphor.
It is, but, despite painting a pretty bleak picture of that situation, the source actually ends on a note of, well, maybe not optimism, but possibility, hope. It says, even now, all is not lost.
How so? What can be done now?
It argues that one letter from a faithful bishop can restore the traditional Latin Mass in his diocese.
Just one letter, so it doesn't require, the whole Traditionis Custodes document to be overturned by a future pope.
Apparently not, according to this source.
Mm-hmm.
It claims the power to make a difference locally still rests with the individual bishops right now.
That's incredibly simple yet profound, isn't it? Just choose what is right.
That's the call to action.
And the source holds out hope that maybe, if even one begins to see the light, others may follow, like a domino effect.
A ripple effect of courage, maybe.
So it puts the onus back on the bishops, but what about everyone else, the faithful?
Well, the source has a message for them, too, a broader call, really. It says, we cannot be silent. We must keep speaking, keep witnessing, and keep praying.
So continued action from the ground up.
Exactly. And it clarifies this isn't just about nostalgia, for nostalgia or a sentiment, but for the glory of God and the salvation of souls. It frames the traditional Latin Mass, the Mass of the ages, as something worthy of defenders.
Okay, so wrapping this up, this deep dive into the real villains of Traditionis Custodes really lays out a provocative case, doesn't it? While Pope Francis issued the directive, Traditionis Custodes, this source forcefully argues that the real impact, the shutting down, the restrictions, that was largely down to the choices made by local bishops. Their actions, or maybe more importantly, their inactions.
Yeah, it emphasizes their agency. They had options, choices.
And according to this source, many chose the path of compliance, maybe fear, over protecting their communities.
It really highlights how top-down directives can be totally reshaped by those on the ground, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For better or worse.
Absolutely. Their implementation, or lack thereof, was key.
And the source leaves us with this powerful quote. Guarding the deposit of faith is the mission which the Lord has entrusted to his church and which she fulfills in every age. So a final thought maybe for you, the listener, thinking about this idea of responsibility, of courage, especially when choices aren't available, even under pressure. How does that resonate beyond this specific context, in other institutions, other belief systems, maybe even in our own lives? Where else does this dynamic play out? Certainly something to reflect on.